Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Fleischer, and on behalf of the American College of Sports Medicine, I want to welcome you to part one of our three-part course on heart rate monitoring and assessment. Our co-sponsors of this course, the ACSM and Polar, have a strong relationship that is built on providing the best and most useful information to individuals participating in exercise and training programs. The ACSM is the largest sports medicine and exercise science organization in the world. With more than 50,000 members and certified professionals worldwide, ACSM is dedicated to advancing and integrating scientific research to provide educational and practical applications of exercise science and sports medicine. In 1975, the idea of portable heart rate monitors came into existence on a skiing track. At that time, there was no way to accurately record heart rates during training. Just over a year later, Polar was founded near the city of Oulu, Finland. In 1979, Polar filed its first patent for wireless heart rate measurement, and in 1982 launched the first ever wire-free wearable heart rate monitor, changing the way athletes trained forever. Before we get into the meat of the course, I first want to introduce myself. I got my start back in 2003 while I was an undergraduate student at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. I was a personal trainer during at a local gym part-time. After this, I decided I would go on and try to become a strength coach, so I got my CSCS through the NSCA and started as an assistant strength coach at a local Washington, D.C. high school, as well as a personal trainer at a gym in the Northern Virginia area. The head strength coach at that high school asked me to get educated in some sort of prehabilitative or post-rehabilitative exercise methodology. So I had pretty much at that time the choice between Pilates and yoga. I chose Pilates, and in 2007 became a certified Stop Pilates instructor, and in 2008 became an instructor trainer for Stop Pilates. I traveled around the world for the next 3 to 4 years, living in Egypt, in Brazil, in Dubai, in Turkey, and after I was done with this, I decided I would come back to the United States and pursue a master's in science and kinesiology, which I did at the University of Texas in Austin. I finished that in 2014 with my thesis on foam rolling and its influence on ankle range of motion and popliteal artery blood flow on the calf muscle. And calf muscles, I'm sorry. And then I decided to stay on as a PhD student at the University of Texas, and now I'm focusing on fine wire EMG motor unit recordings of the hip and how it pertains to low back pathologies, as well as surface EMG and Vicon motion capture kinematic data during a single leg stance. So I'm doing that, and I'm also an anatomy instructor for Bio 446L in the biology department. I also do a little bit of triathlon and cycling coaching and try to participate when I can in Ironman triathlon. So I've done about 11 of those. And in addition, I'm a sports massage therapist for collegiate swimmers. So I've worked on Texas, on Harvard, and on Iowa State University. I also travel with a concierge company to Ironman events and massage athletes on my breaks from school. So all that just to say, I'll be pulling a lot of my practical application from triathlon, so swimming, cycling, and running, and I will be pulling a lot of application, particularly in Part 3, the Advanced Techniques course, which I'll talk about in a minute, from a mind-body perspective. So let's talk about the course structure. We have 3 seminars. The first one is the Foundations. That's today. We're going to go over a lot of basic physiology about heart rate and some other things. We'll also go over the basic techniques in the following seminar. This is going to cover programming for cyclists and runners. And then in the Advanced Techniques course, we'll look at some different ways to utilize heart rate primarily in respiratory muscle training, and this is where mind-body training fits in. So let's go over our objectives for today. Number 1, we want to understand the importance of proper data interpretation. Number 2, we want to describe the importance of measuring heart rate. Number 3, we want to identify and explain the various factors that affect heart rate. And number 4, we want to identify the benefits of training in each of the 5 heart rate training zones. So let's get started with objective 1. Understand the importance of proper data interpretation. This will be our shortest objective, but a very important one to start with. So we live in the age of big data. We are inundated with data and numbers every day. And if you're a fitness trainer in the fitness industry, or even if you're watching this just to get a better understanding of how to utilize heart rate, you know that wearables are very popular. Perhaps you own one, perhaps you own a Polar, a Garmin, a Fitbit, something like this, and it gives you a lot of information at any point in time. So you can figure out sleep cycles, you can figure out how many steps you're taking, you can put things like your nutrition in these gadgets, you can put exercise goals, but what's it all, you can get heart rate, which is what we're going to talk about, but what's it all mean and how do we manage it? Well, the first thing we want to be careful of is having a biased perception. So we want to look at the data for what it is and understand that we're always going to be looking at data and correlating it with our client experience. So that's really what this first objective is all about. And here's what I mean. Here's an example of coaches and players' perceptions of a training dose. And it says, coaches and players' perceptions of a training dose, not a perfect match. If you'd like to read this article in full, you can get on Google Scholar or PubMed and pull it up. And basically what it's about is it looks at very experienced coaches and dosing young athletes in training. So by dosing, I mean, what kind of exercises are they giving them and how much and at what intensity. And so what the study found was that these coaches would say, let's just say, give a workout that had them working out of 80% of their max, and they'd interview the athletes at the end of the workout, and they say, what did you feel? How did you feel about this workout? Where were you at on it as far as 100% being all out, and 0 being it was nothing? And these individuals said, well, inevitably the soccer players would say, this was a lot harder than than 80% to us. So a lot of the young elite players perceived it as harder than what it was intended by the coach. So there was this disconnect between what the coaches thought was 80% and what the players thought was 80%. And so, there's this gap between, there's this possible gap that exists between what we're, giving our athletes or our clients or what we're doing ourselves and what actually is the number how intense the workout that we're giving actually is. So we want to bridge that gap. Well, one of the recommendations they made in this article, they said, okay, instead of just doing, perception, like this feels like 80% or this feels like 70%, and having this disconnect between coaches and players, why don't you use some data, some actual numbers like a heart rate monitor to kind of help you understand how intense the training sessions actually are. And so to help bridge that gap and help understand, how players are feeling about workouts with actual numbers of physiological intensity, which is what heart rate is. It's a measurement of physiological intensity. So what that tells us is that we need numbers, we need data, and heart rate is a great place to start because it gives us real-time measurement of intensity of work in aerobic training. And we also need a client relationship, so we need this feedback. I thought this, for example, I thought this workout was an 80% workout out of 100%. What do you think? Well, I felt like it was 70. Well, I felt like it was 75. You need to be able to kind of quantify it with numbers, and also what do those numbers mean? And so you want to get really good at asking a lot of questions. You don't want to assume too much off of one workout. You want to make sure that you're understanding things correctly, and and above everything, you want to stay very humble on what you know. So just kind of take the approach of, hey, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. You tell me what this means, how you feel about it. Here's what the numbers suggest. And so hopefully by the end of this series, you're going to have a really good idea on what the numbers could possibly mean and how to become a better trainer and how to communicate with your client and allow them to communicate better with you. So with that being said, let's move to objective two, the importance of measuring heart rate. And this is really where we're going to start to get into the thick of things. Well, first off, what is heart rate? Well, heart rate is the amount of times your heart beats per minute. Now, this is either measured in beats per minute, BPMs, or a percentage of your max heart rate. We'll talk about max heart rate in a minute, and how to get a proper number for what your max heart rate is. But you could either say I'm working out at 170 beats per minute, or that could also be 90% of your max. So both of those are legitimate expressions of heart rate training intensity. Now, stroke volume is something that a term you may hear when it comes to training. This is the volume of blood per beat. Now, training will influence this. So your heart will be able to, as you train more and more, your heart will be able to pump more blood per given beat. And then that kind of leads us to cardiac output, which is basically your heart rate times your stroke volume. Okay, now your heart rate's regulated by your autonomic nervous system, and you've got a couple parts here. One is your sympathetic, which it speeds your heart rate up. So you may have heard the term fight or flight. Okay, so this speeds up the heart rate. And then there's the parasympathetic, which you may have heard the term slows down your heart rate, which you may have heard the term rest and digest. So sympathetic speeds the heart rate up, fight or flight mechanism. Parasympathetic slows the heart rate down, rest and digest. So we just kind of want to be familiar with these terms as we go through this course. So just some basic definitions. Now, why is heart rate important? Well, as I mentioned earlier, it provides real-time feedback. So on training intensity. So how intense is your workout aerobically? Okay, so it lets you know that real time, which is very valuable. So I could be running, right, and I could see that I'm working out at 90% of my heart rate max, and that gives me a really good understanding, hey, I'm probably going to be shutting it down soon because that's really intense and that's very high, and I'll feel that. So it lets you, so you're able to correlate how you're feeling with an actual number, which is pretty cool. Okay, now there's a direct relationship between heart rate and oxygen consumption. So as you increase your intensity, your heart rate goes up, and so does the amount of oxygen you need. Makes sense. So you want to understand that when we talk about something like VO2 max late in a minute. So another reason why heart rate's important is because it increases efficiency. So if you know your heart rate max, you're able to build actual programs off of that. So I can go in, and if I know how heart rate works, I can go in and build programs for with specific goals in mind. So let's say I want to run a marathon or a half marathon or something. I can have workouts, heart rate based workouts. As long as I know my heart rate max, I can have workouts building to that goal of having the best marathon I've ever run just based off heart rate training. So instead of going out and saying, all right, I'm going to run 2 hours today and keep running 2 hours 3 times a week and hope for the best on race day for, let's say, a half marathon, I can go out and, let's say, have one workout that's 30 minutes at a very intense workout, but it can be extremely beneficial in the long run and have more of a benefit than, let's say, going out and running for those 2 hours every other day or something like that. And then I can mix that with, let's say, an hour-long medium run where I'm going at, not quite as hard as I can go, but pretty hard. Enough to where I'm gassed after about an hour, and then I could have a few of those long runs that I spoke of, 1.5 hour, 2 hour runs. And so understanding your heart rate and how to kind of put it together in a recipe for success for whatever your goal is real important. So you're able to program and train smarter, not harder. It's also a nice tool to be able to use with safety. And I'll tell you a story. When I was a trainer up in the Washington, D.C. area, there was a dentist who lived close by and had a practice, and he would come in every evening and work out. Well, I remember one evening he came in and he said, I want to work out really hard tonight. So he went and he worked out really, really hard. He's about 68 years old and he was doing supersets and just having a great time with it. Well, he went home that evening and nobody thought much of it, and he had a heart attack. And I've always wondered if he was wearing a heart rate monitor, during that time, and somebody was able to monitor what was going on with his heart, would something like that have happened, or could it have been prevented? Maybe. And so a heart rate monitor can keep us safe, and so it's good to wear one because of this. So in addition to that, it also can provide accountability. So you can see how your fitness is progressing based on your heart rate, and you can take that and you can actually upload the data onto online platforms such as Training Peaks or Polar Flow or Garmin Connect, something like this, and you can look and analyze your data, and a trainer could possibly look at that. That way, you can communicate, okay, here's what I did to the trainer. The trainer can then dose proper exercises at given heart rate intensities for you and put them right back. You can communicate through an online platform, so that way he or she sees how much work you've done, and then you have a really adequate understanding of what you've done as well. One thing I'm guilty of is I like to think about training a lot, but then some weeks I'll go in and I'll be thinking about training and I think I've trained a lot, and then I look at the total hours and the intensities that I've trained, and it's a lot less than what I think. So it provides that when you can record that data and then upload it, it provides that accountability to yourself. It affords you the opportunity to give that to a trainer, which is more accountability, and then they're able to give you feedback based on your training sessions and communicate right back to you. So it's a great way to just have accountability with either a trainer or yourself. So these are really valuable factors when you talk about training, and how heart rate can kind of come in and help you program for a really effective training. So heart rate max, I mentioned it earlier. So what is this? Well, this is fundamental for heart rate based training. Okay, and we want to make sure that we have a very accurate number of your heart rate max, because we base everything off of a percentage of this. Well, what is it? Well, it's the maximum amount of beats per minute for an individual. Now, this is going to decrease with age, but other than that, it stays the same. So as you get older, this will decrease. But once you find out what your heart rate max is, it is not going to increase. It is what it is. So we are able to utilize formulas to estimate this. And one that works pretty well is 220 minus your age. Now, it's not great for everybody, and I'll talk about this later, but it is a good starting point for most of us. And that's what these formulas are good for, a starting point to estimate our max heart rate. So for me, I'm 37. So if I went 220 minus 37, I have 183. That would be an estimate of my max heart rate. Well, I know through max heart rate testing that my max heart rate is 184. So that's pretty close, pretty close. Now, that's not going to work that way for everybody, but it'd be a good start. And then once you take a heart rate max test or a submaximal test to estimate it even, to get a better understanding of what it is, then you can plug that number in. But at first, if you're rather deconditioned, it's a very safe place to start. And again, I just want to emphasize how fundamental it is that we know this number, because you're going to be basing all your training off of that number. So with that said, we have some terms we need to go over. The first one being aerobic threshold. Now, what is aerobic threshold? Well, this is when lactate starts to increase in your blood above a resting value. So lactate is a good thing. It is a substrate your body utilizes, and this shift from fat to carbohydrate is kind of measured by this aerobic threshold. So when you start to increase at first your blood lactate, this kind of signifies, hey, you're shifting from utilizing fat, which you were utilizing at rest and very low intensities, to more carbohydrate, which is what you'll utilize at higher intensities. So it doesn't feel like very much. It's just when you start to get an increase of this lactate within the blood. And so this is known as your aerobic threshold. Again, this is correlated with your heart rate at approximately 65%. Well, anaerobic threshold is also correlated with heart rate, and this occurs at approximately 85% of your max. Now, this is when lactate starts to exponentially accumulate in the blood. So when you pass this level, you're going to fatigue pretty soon. So it's utilized as an indicator for fatigue. Now, we just want to keep in mind that lactate is a substrate. It does not cause fatigue. Rather, it's an indicator of fatigue. So the amount of lactate you have in your blood, especially when you cross this point, we can say, okay, you probably don't have too much left in the tank. You're gonna start to gas out pretty soon. So that's what we want to understand about it. Aerobic threshold is when you start to increase lactate within the blood, and then when you start to exponentially increase that lactate within the blood, that is known as your anaerobic threshold. And what we want to understand about it is it's utilized as an indicator for fatigue. I want you to appreciate as well, like I said, it is a substrate. So lactate is a very good thing. Sometimes it gets this negative connotation to it, but there's no reason for that. You use lactate for energy, okay? Now, with that said, VO2 max, what is this? Well, this is the amount of oxygen consumed measured in milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute. So you'll see it as written as ml per kg per minute. So what does this tell us? Well, the big picture is it tells us how big your aerobic engine is. So for example, an Iditarod dog has a VO2 max of approximately 240 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Well, what's that mean? Well, it means they have huge aerobic engines, and they can go for long periods of time without getting tired aerobically at pretty high intensities, okay? Now, a college student has about 35 to 40 milliliters per kg per minute. So sedentary college folks, just sit around all day eating chips, watching TV, playing video games, don't exercise much. This is what you can kind of expect. You compare that with somebody like a Lance Armstrong, who has a VO2 max of 84, much bigger aerobic engine, not an Iditarod dog, but definitely not like a college student. So pretty big, probably more inclined to be successful in aerobic activities. Well, what's this mean? Well, in heterogeneous populations, i.e. the college student versus Lance Armstrong, we can kind of predict that the person with VO2, a higher VO2 max is going to have a better performance aerobically than the person with the lower VO2 max. However, when VO2 maxes are very similar, let's say I have a VO2 max of 81 and Lance has that VO2 max of 84, it's not a predictor of endurance success. So it doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to win the bike race, let's say, or a marathon or a triathlon, although we all know he would. He's not, it doesn't guarantee, just based on that number, if we have similar VO2 maxes, it does not guarantee that success there. So we want to appreciate that. So in heterogeneous populations, when the VO2 max is very different, i.e., my VO2 max is about 60 against somebody who's like at 84, I'm probably going to lose. But if I'm up there in the 80s with them, then it's not a predictor. Other things are predictors. So we just want to keep that in mind. Now, the good news about VO2 max is that it can be trained. You may have read, oh, it can't be trained, it is what it is. Well, that's true once you are trained. It's not really going to move much. But if you're that sedentary college student out there watching this, you're 35 to 40, there's hope. You can go out and train your VO2 max and increase the ceiling on your aerobic engine to get quite high. So you could improve it quite a bit from that 35 to 40 range. And so if you're sedentary, once you become well trained and you're very physically fit, this number is pretty much what it is at that point. Now, how do you measure this? Well, you use a metabolic cart, right, which you could go to a university like we have at the Fit Institute here at the University of Texas and go up, and Phil Stanforth will take your your measurements and put you through a VO2 max test on a treadmill or a bike. And they have a metabolic cart right there that will take all these measurements in and give you a very accurate score on what your VO2 max is. That can get kind of expensive, especially if it's not affiliated with a university. It can get really expensive. So maybe you want to do testing another way, as in take a field test, which there are submaximal field tests and maximal field tests that'll give you an estimation of what your VO2 max is. Remember, we talked about how oxygen consumption and heart rate have a nice correlation together. So that's why you can utilize these tests. Polar actually has their own fitness test, which is taken at rest, where if it's best taken in the morning. You could just go to sleep with your heart rate monitor on, wake up, and then scroll down in your Polar watch to take the fitness test, hit start, and just lay there for about 5 minutes while it takes several readings of your heart rate over a period of time, and using the heart rate variability and combining that with things like your age and gender and weight, they have an algorithm that'll give you a predicted VO2 score based on this. And I know that my VO2 max is about 60. Well, when I took this test, it gave me an estimate of 59. So that's pretty close to what it is. So it does seem to be reliable, and these are on Polar's, several of the Polar devices. So now you have these tests that you can just take at rest, and they give you a pretty accurate number. So something that you may want to utilize as well. Now, to give you an understanding of what what a VO2 score means, here's kind of the ranges you'll see: what's considered good, what's considered average, what's considered very poor. And we'll just use me for an example. So I'm 37, my VO2 max is 60. So if I look down and I see, okay, 35 to 39 men, and then I go to excellent, which is greater than 54. However, at one time, I remember when I was at about 38 to 39, which is between fair and average. So so that's to show you how training can influence your VO2 max. I started pretty low, and now I'm not super high, but I'm high enough to be a fit age group athlete. You'll see that men and women have different VO2 scores. That's only because women tend to have smaller organs, so they're working a little bit harder, so those VO2 maxes tend to be a little bit lower on average. But let's just remember, VO2 max is not everything. It's just something we want to have an understanding of because it's going to correlate well with heart rate. So average heart rate, let's talk about it. Average heart rate during a training session and how we can possibly use it. Well, it can give us an idea of what the metabolic cost or the energy cost was in a given training session, depending on what that training session involved. And I think a great way to use it is to test and retest your fitness. So we know that with aerobic training, average heart rate, all other things being kept constant, will start to decrease over time. So you'll be able to go faster, let's say, or you'll be able to go at the same speed with a lower heart rate, or i.e. less intensity, as you get more and more fit. So one way to do this is just find a treadmill, find your favorite treadmill in your local gym, hop on it, and go set it to a specific speed, whatever you like, and something you could hold for 20 minutes. Take the average of that 20 minutes and write it down. Okay, let's say you're on a 2% incline, you're going 5 miles per hour for 20 minutes. That's week 1. I go back 6 weeks later after I've been training and training and training, and I do that same thing again, same time, same treadmill, same everything. 5 miles per hour, 20 minutes, and I see that, hey, my average heart rate is lowered by, let's say, 5 beats. I must be getting fitter. That's a great way to utilize average heart rate. And so it's a great way to test and retest where you're at physically. Resting heart rate. Well, this is the lowest number of heart rate beats per minute when fully relaxed without distraction. So you heard me mention, hey, this is when you want to take this Polar Own Index test where you just press start and that fitness test comes up, and it just takes your heart rate at rest, and it puts it into an algorithm to give you a VO2 score. Well, this can be affected several ways by age, fitness level, genetics, health status, gender. But one thing is when you become more and more fit, this resting heart rate should go down as well. It decreases as a result of cardiovascular conditioning. What's normal between 60 and 80. However, some people have had I've seen there have been competitive athletes who've had resting heart rate all the way up to 70. Some individuals will have resting heart rates as high as 100. Other individuals will have very low resting heart rates. So you're, as low as say 28, 29. I had one individual who is a friend of mine who's a pro female triathlete in Ironman, and she had to have hip surgery, and she was up in Colorado having this hip surgery, and when they put her under with anesthesia, her resting heart rate was 32. Well, they thought the machine was broken, so they reset the EKG machine, and what ended up happening was they had no idea that that was her resting heart rate. So the machine was absolutely correct. So you'll see very low resting heart rates and top-notch endurance athletes oftentimes. If you're a lot of times, if it's exceptionally high relative to what you're used to, this can be an indicator of fatigue or illness, overtraining. So that's training too much, which we'll get in part 3. But so it's a good number to have a hold on and understand what it means. Recovery heart rate. So this is another one where you'll be able to drive your recovery heart rate down faster and faster as you become more and more fit. So what is it? Well, it's your ability to recover after a bout of exercise. So for example, if I go out and I run really hard for 1 minute, how fast can I lower my heart rate in 1 minute? And this is after a good warm-up, of course. So where this is relevant are individuals like biathletes who they'll be doing cross-country skiing, and they'll come up and have to shoot at a target, okay, after performing a lot of aerobic activity. Well, they have to lower their heart rate to focus very fast. So they need to be very aerobically fit to do this. In fact, these individuals tend to have very high VO2 maxes, generally speaking. So that's how it's relevant. So as you become more and more fit, your ability to recover faster will improve. Let's talk about identifying and explaining the various factors that affect heart rate. So it's not always so black and white. There are 4 big factors that we're going to talk about: personal, lifestyle, exercise, and conditions. So these factors are all going to influence your heart rate. We'll break them down one at a time and provide points for each one. Number 1, genetics. There's a saying out there that goes, if you want to be an Olympic champion, then you must choose your parents wisely. And so what that means is, if you're blessed with good genetics, then you can, that's a big part of success in endurance performance, or in performance in general athletically, a lot of times. So if you're born with just that low resting heart rate, your ability to perform aerobically is probably a lot greater than others that isn't like that. I know several individuals who have transitioned from sports like basketball and soccer to a sport like long distance triathlon, like an Ironman, and seen a lot of success. They've seen a lot of success, and a lot of that has to do with genetics. They were just born gifted. Well, this your heart rate. Were you born with a low resting heart rate? Can you, is this something that you're just naturally gifted with? Could be. Okay. Your fitness level. Like I said, as you become more fit, the resting heart rate will go down. Your heart rate at a given intensity will decrease. So how fit are you? Your age. Remember, This is the one thing that we talked about. Once you know your max heart rate, you're not going to increase it, but as you get older, it will decrease. So how old are you? Plays a factor on your limits here as far as the max heart rate goes. Gender, are you male or are you female? That can have an influence on your heart rate. Resting heart rate, remember, as you become more fit, this will decrease. And with that maximal heart rate, just because we have an estimate of what my heart rate is based off of age, your max heart rate, you won't know it until you take one of these maximal heart rate tests, actually what it is. So these are some personal factors that all of them can affect heart rate. Now, your lifestyle factors. Some of these can go either way. Some of them can raise heart rate and some of them can lower heart rate. So a lot of the research is conflicting, so I kind of want to be a bit clear about that. Just note that they do affect, these are variables that can affect heart rate. One of them being sleep. Did you sleep well last night? Did you get a good sleep? You'd like to, if you didn't sleep well, let's say you have a newborn child, you slept 2 hours, the only time you can work out is you get an hour in the morning, from 9 to 10, you go in, you hop on the treadmill, and you didn't sleep well, and you just are so tired, you can't get your heart rate up, okay, because you're so fatigued. That's an example of how it could possibly affect you. Stress levels as well. Are you stressed? You come in from after work, and you've just had a real stressful day at work, you had so many deadlines, and you come in and you hop on the treadmill, and you see that before you even start running, your heart rate is through the roof. So stress can totally affect your heart rate. Why are all these things important, by the way? Because these will build the questions you're going to want to ask yourself and or your clients when they come in the door. Okay, what their stress levels like, what their sleep's like, what are their smoking and drinking habits. Hopefully they're not doing either of these things, but if they do, understand how they affect certain individuals. Smoking is a stimulant, drinking is a depressant. Traditionally thinking, you think that smoking will speed up the heart rate, drinking will lower it. That's often true. Sometimes it's not, but I do know that it will affect the heart rate, so you want to know those things because these will give you a sense of certain factors that could have an adverse effect on heart rate during training. Hydration and nutrition, these are big ones right here. Dehydration and loss of sodium content, or hypernatremia, they're two huge factors in performance that can really decrease your performance fast. So I was recently down in Cozumel, the Ironman, and the night before the race, I had all the athletes for the service I was working for come down to the lobby, and I was giving a sports nutrition talk, and I told the individuals, I said, it's going to be really hot out there tomorrow, so you want to make sure that you take in plenty of salt and make sure that you're drinking a lot. Make sure you're drinking a lot, more than normal probably. Well, the one lady who didn't come down and hear this ended up going into the race, and I didn't know who she was, but I heard later she didn't take in enough salt during the race and ended up going into a hypernatremic state during the race. So the way that she fueled was not proper, and her heart rate skyrocketed, and she was probably dehydrated with that. So you could dehydrate as little as 2-3% in heat, and it caused real big problems. The heart rate skyrockets, and then your day is done. So understand that your hydration levels will definitely play a role with heart rate. What medications are you on? Now this is going to be different for everybody, so you want to understand how these medications affect heart rate. So just get a list of medications, understand how they affect heart rate, understand when your clients are taking them or when you are taking them. Caffeine as well. Now there are responders and non-responders to caffeine. I do realize that, so I know this because I'm a non-responder. Caffeine doesn't affect me at all. However, some individuals, it's a stimulant, right? And so they drink a cup of coffee or they come in, they've had a triple latte and they're wired up and their heart rate's already elevated significantly before they've even started working out. Well, it's a possible explanation for you as to why their heart rate's so high. Conversely, I could drink a cup of coffee and go right to sleep. So it doesn't bother me that much. Some individuals are like that. Just understand how it affects your client and how it affects you if you're utilizing this for your own training purposes. Exercise and conditions, the environment you're in. Okay, so like we talked about, are you in a hot environment like I am in Austin, Texas, or are you in a cooler environment? Right now, I am in South Korea teaching a few Pilates courses over the winter break, and it is ice cold over here. So I've gone out for a few bundled up runs around the river near my apartment down here in Bundang, and it's very after I'm bundled up, I can go I can go at a higher intensity than I can in Austin during the summer for sure. Hotter weather, your heart rate's going to be more elevated than in cooler temperatures. So understand how environment affects your heart rate. The time of day you work out. Are you a person who likes to work out in the morning, evening? What I'll say about this, find a time of day that works for you and stay consistent with it. If you go into the gym after you've been working all day, maybe you're not going to have such a good workout as if you came in the morning. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but go with what works for you and try and stay consistent with the time of day so that this doesn't become a huge factor for you. Altitude. Altitude can have a significant effect on your heart rate. I've done the Leadville 100 a couple years, and haven't completed it yet. I failed to complete it twice, but that's because I got high altitude pulmonary edema, and a part of the reason for that was I wasn't acclimated to the altitude. So the air is much thinner there, and so your heart works a lot harder at given intensities. I remember I got up there a few years ago and went for a light jog, real slow jog, and my heart rate went to about 176, 177 on flat ground, and I'm doing 10 kilometers an hour, which isn't very fast. So because I live in Austin, so if you're gonna go race, or your client's gonna go race at altitude, there's conflicting research. Do you fly up the night before the event, or do you take a week, 2 weeks to get acclimated? I would just err on the side of getting more time is better. So get up there as early as you can. I know Leadville, which is 10,000 feet above sea level, athletes will get up there oftentimes 3 weeks, a month, 2 months before, just to get acclimated and make sure. And I think that's wise if you're going to do a race at that intensity. That's 100 miles in 30 hours, or so through some pretty steep terrain at altitude. So you want to keep that in mind. So know how altitude will affect heart rate. How often are you working? What's your frequency? What's your duration? So this is where your online platforms really help out. If you're a weekend warrior type and you haven't been training at all, and then all of a sudden you go out and you train 20 hours next week because that's your New Year's resolution, you may see that your resting heart rate's pretty elevated because you've overdone it. So understand how your training over time and during small amounts of time is affected. It may, it can give you an idea of whether or not you're overdoing it or not. What type of exercise are you doing? What mode? So are you swimming? Are you running? Are you cycling? And what's that mean to you specifically? So where are you at? So, if I'm running in the heat in Austin, my heart rate's going to be significantly higher than, let's say, if I'm swimming in a pool in Austin. Okay, indoors in the middle of winter. So understand what type of exercise you're doing. What are you using? How heart rate is affected by that type of exercise, and so that you have an understanding of how it comes into play with these other conditions. The intensity level, which is what we're going to spend the rest of our time on right now. How intense are you going in the exercise? Are you doing very low intense runs? Are you doing some high intensity? And so what's that mean? Well, the intensity, heart rate is a physiological real-time measurement of intensity. And so combined and looked at with all these other variables will give you some really good information. So having said all that, let's tackle our fourth and final objective, and that's to identify the benefits of each heart rate training zone. So here's our heart rate training zones. Now, we've talked about all the factors. We've talked about that affect heart rate. We've talked, or a lot of them. We've talked about the basic physiology and science behind heart rate-based training. So now we need to start to, how do you build a program? Well, once you know your max heart rate, here's your training zones. So we have 1 through 5, 1 being very light, 5 being maximum. And you can see that 1 starts at 50 to 60% and then goes up in 10% increments. So you'll see a different style or different modes of exercise at each intensity. So this is just a general nice little chart that'll give you a basic understanding of intensity levels with heart rate based training. So let's break it all down. Let's talk about zone 1, 50 to 60% of your heart rate max. So, if my heart rate max is, let's say, 180, 50% of that's 90. That's not very high. That's a brisk walk. So if that. So, zone 1 intensity is what's called an active recovery zone. For certain individuals who are sedentary at first, this may mean just taking a day off. If you see zone 1 on your calendar, maybe it means just rest that day. I've got a picture up here of an individual in recovery boots reading a bicycle magazine, just taking a day off. It could mean a Pilates workout or yoga workout. When you see these zone 1 programmed, or you are programming zone 1, what you're basically saying is, we want you to rest, a gentle swim. This isn't even a light jog, really, unless you're a really, really, really advanced runner. This is a very gentle swim, a very gentle workout. 50 to 60%, like I said, is not much. So keep that in mind. So we won't be spending a lot of time talking about different fancy programs within zone 1. Zone 2, however, is a little bit different. This is about 60 to 70% of your heart rate max. This is known as your endurance zone. You're going to get a lot of good physiological benefits here. Just primarily, though, it's going to improve your aerobic function. It's often called base building. It's absolutely fundamental that you have zone 2 training, particularly when you're starting out. So you're building that aerobic foundation, that aerobic base. What do I mean by that? Well, you're learning how to utilize fat as a substrate. Your body has, I don't care how thin you are, your body has a lot of fat that it can possibly utilize. And your ability to utilize fat as an energy source is going to help you with your fitness. So the most elite athletes, one of the things that's common among all these elite endurance athletes, I should say, is that they're able to spare muscle glycogen and utilize fat effectively and very efficiently. So, so this is known as the fat burning zone. So teaching your body, so to speak, how to utilize fat as a substrate is very important. So you go out for a run, and 60 to 70% of your heart rate max is not much. So this can be a frustrating zone to work out in, I'll be honest. You go out for a run and you're 65% of your heart rate max and you look down and you're barely jogging. Well, what I would recommend is that you would just stay with it for a time. If you have a couple of zone 2 runs scheduled a week, stay with it, walk, stay in the zone. Over time with training, you'll be jogging faster and faster at the same heart rate as you get more and more fit. So, but you want to stay with it, and a big reason why you want to stay with it is not only because of the metabolic adaptation, so you're improving circulation, improving aerobic function, but you're also building injury resistance. So what I mean by that is your tendons and your bones are getting much stronger because they're taking on compression, but you're not, it's not like you're sprinting all out. So you're at risk for popping a hamstring or tearing an Achilles or something like that. This is gentle exercise. So you're getting stronger bones and tendons as a result. Zone 3 is a bit more intense than this. So we'll call it, moderate, just a little bit more intense. So it's not it's not going to feel much different than that zone 2. So again, you're going to be improving your aerobic fitness in this zone 3. It feels fairly light, but you're going to start to sweat a bit more than you were in zone 2. It's good for moderately long exercise. So let's say we're going out for an hour and 15, hour and 20, hour and 30 minutes. Good for those longer runs. Oftentimes zone 2, zone 3 work. It improves circulation. Just much like zone 2, you get a lot of the same benefits. It's just a little bit more intense. So usually your zone 2, zone 3 workouts, there's a give and take there, right, where you have them both mixed into the same workout. Just what percentages you're utilizing may be the difference. And again, you're going to be getting that benefit of injury resistance. So still in that mindset of base building, but like I said, just a little bit more intense. Now, zone 4 is where it really starts to change. This is about 80 to 90% of your heart rate max. And if you think back about your thresholds that we talked about earlier, remember at approximately 85%, and that's an approximation, I know, you're going to be at your anaerobic threshold. Now, at this level, when you pass that anaerobic threshold, you're going to fatigue fast. But there's real benefit here. So a lot of your marathon runners, your pro marathon runners and your pro triathletes, what they try to do is they try to push that lactate threshold. So let's say they know their lactate threshold occurs at, I don't know, 156 beats per minute. Well, they're going to race at 154, 155, just under that lactate threshold, and try and race there for the whole marathon. Well, why is that? Well, they know that once they go over that, they're not too far from fatiguing. But if they can push it and their blood can tolerate that lactate, okay, over time, then they're going to be able to perform well. So this is what a lot of the pro endurance athletes, this is their race pace intensity is in zone 4. And I've got a picture up of some of the some great Olympians in an Olympic distance triathlon. That's where they'll race between that 80-90% mark. And it feels hard. This is where a lot of your interval training starts to happen. So what I mean by that is going hard or going at a specific intensity for a time and then taking a break from that for a time. So we'll talk about that a little bit more on this next slide. But this is where it starts. Interval, shorter duration, your ability to absorb lactate or to take on more blood lactate. They call it steady state lactate. How long can you hold on to a given intensity just under your lactate threshold or just above it? How much lactate can your blood withstand? Okay. Now, 90 to 100% of your heart rate max, zone 5. Well, this is great for developing speed. So you're working on speed drills, you know, there's parachute drills you see, you're on the track, painful times. In-season pro athletes, oftentimes pro endurance athletes will have 1 to 2 of these scheduled a week during the race season, maybe 2, if that. These are very intense, very hard workouts, and they're very short. That's the only good news. So I'll give you an example of one. Go out to the track, run as hard as you can for 2 minutes after a good warm-up, and then walk for a minute. Do that 10 times, 30-minute workout. That's what you call a zone 5 workout. All out, hard as you can go, and then you're taking a break. Now, you get a lot of good adaptations here metabolically, but you also risk injury, and mentally it's very hard. So you want to kind of weigh that. And that's why you don't do it a ton. So you'll see maybe two a week in the off season for some individuals, depending on how their program's structured. But in season, you'll see 1 a week, maybe 2 if that. Not much, and it's because you risk injury so much and the mental burnout that can happen. It's just hard. It is not a comfortable place to be. But like I said, the only thing that's good about it is it'll be over soon. And let's just keep in mind this is for very fit individuals. So that's why zone 2, zone 3 are very important to build that injury resistance so that you can get up and train in these zone 4s and zone 5s. So the takeaway on that is it's good, but use it sparingly. Okay, so here's your heart rate training zones again. You can kind of see over there just the different types of gym workouts that you may see affiliated with these training zones. And this is, what you really want to understand is that there are benefits to each one of these training zones. So a well-structured program is going to have some of everything in there, particularly zones 2, 3, and 4, a little bit of zone 5, not very much of zone 1, but still important to rest, right? You want to make sure you have adequate rest in there. So, but you're going to combine you're going to combine all these together depending on the program. Do you want to run a marathon? Do you want to run a 5K? Do you want to do a Spartan race? All these things, are going to be individual programs, but you're going to be utilizing all these training zones depending on what you're training for. So keep that in mind. It's not just all about high intensity interval training, and it's not just all about, working out in zone 2. So that's what brings us to our last slide here, or I'm sorry, one of our last slides. There's some myths that go with this, and one of them is, the zone 2, I'm just going to work out in zone 2 because I burn the most fat, I oxidize the most fat, and I'm trying to lose weight, and that's what I want to do. Well, please keep in mind that we're talking about fat as a substrate. We're not talking about caloric expenditure. Okay, we're talking about utilizing fat as a substrate. So it's kind of like thinking about if you only want to work out in zone 2 because you're utilizing fat, that's good because you're oxidizing fat, but it's like taking a big piece of a little pie, where you utilize fat being the big piece, the substrate you're primarily using. Well, as you increase intensity, the pie gets bigger, right? The caloric expenditure is going to get bigger, but that piece is going to get smaller. So it's like, do I want a little piece of a big pie or a big piece of a small pie? I'm not trying to take anything away from zone 2, but it's often used as an excuse when you show up to the gym and individuals will try and argue with you, oh, and I want to stay in this fat burning zone because I want to lose weight. It's not true. We're not talking about caloric expenditure. Substrate utilization, okay? High intensity interval training is always good is another one. You see this a lot with a lot of boutique fitness gyms. They'll do a lot of these high intensity workouts, and which is good occasionally, but that's not all there is. Remember, we want to utilize all the zones, and we want to avoid injury risk. So there are benefits metabolically to training at higher intensity. There's also benefits metabolically to training at lower intensities. So just kind of keep that in mind, and keep it in mind with what your goals are. Now, let's talk about rate of perceived exertion last. So rate of perceived exertion, we use a 1 to 20 or 1 to 10 or a 6 to 20 scale of fatigue. What does it mean for your client? So we say the bottom of the scale, either 6 is very light or 1 is very light, and 10 or 20 being your max effort. So what's it mean to your client? And how are we supposed to use it? Well, I'll kind of give you an example. One of my clients lives in Canada, and an individual I started working with last year, he's about 40, in his 40s, and he, he's an experienced cyclist, but he was really out of shape. And so he said, I want you to program for me. I want you to help me out. And so he's like, I got a lot of indoor training to do, so would you write a program based off of heart rate? And I said, sure. So we went and programmed based off of his heart rate estimate, 220 minus his age, and figured out that his max heart rate should be around 178, 179. Well, I was programming based off this at first. Remember, he wasn't in shape. And so we didn't want to put him through a max heart rate test at first, and he says, these workouts are good, I'm just feeling like they're not hard enough. And I'm like, well, your heart rate's suggesting they're pretty hard. He's like, yeah, but I don't feel much around 165, 170. I don't feel like I'm really working out. These should be my upper zone limits. And I said, yeah, that's correct. And so we gave it a couple weeks, and I said, what's going on here? So eventually, once he got fit enough, we put him through a max heart rate test. Well, we figured out his max heart rate's about 191. So based off our estimation, it was supposed to be 178, 179, and it was like 12 beats off, 12, 13 beats off. So that's a big difference, and that's why you want to do the max testing, and that's why the formulas don't work for everybody. But the way we were able to get to that was because he was telling me, based off his RPE, hey, this feels like a 13 or 14 when it should be feeling like a 17 or 18. So I asked the question, well, something's up, and that's when we figured out we were 12 beats off. So the communication there based off of RP and looking at his numbers, kind of like we talked about the data and the conversation with the clients at the beginning, when we talked about those things, we have a better understanding now on how we can utilize them in a program. Once we recalibrated his program for him, everything made sense, everything worked, everything was golden. But that's how you use it. So, having said that, that is all for our webinar. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you next time.